I never imagined my own daughter-in-law would shove me to the ground on her wedding day. The impact knocked the wind out of me, my scraped knees dragging against the polished marble of the Grand Pavilion ballroom as 140 guests froze in stunned silence. The sharp sting radiated up my legs, a hot, throbbing fire that made me gasp, but it was nothing compared to the ache deep in my chest, like a fist squeezing my heart until it threatened to burst. My simple lavender dress, the one I'd chosen carefully from a thrift store rack because it reminded me of happier times, now bunched awkwardly around my hips, stained with the faint smudge of Vanessa's handprint where she'd pushed me. The air in the ballroom hung heavy with the scent of fresh orchids and expensive perfume, now soured by shock and something darker, betrayal. My heart shattered worse than my pride, a fragile thing cracking under the weight of what my own family had become. Vanessa, the woman my son Nathan had married just minutes earlier, stood over me with fire in her eyes because I wouldn't sign over the deed to my lakeside cabin. Her veil fluttered slightly in the draft from the air conditioning, casting delicate shadows on her flawless makeup, but her expression was anything but delicate, twisted with rage and triumph. "That's what you get for hoarding what should be ours," she hissed, her voice cutting through the hush like a blade, echoing off the crystal chandeliers that sparkled mockingly overhead. "An old widow like you doesn't need a whole cabin to herself." I could taste the metallic tang of blood where I'd bitten my lip in the fall, and my hands trembled as I pressed them against the cold floor, feeling the smooth, unyielding marble that suddenly seemed like a symbol of how hard and unforgiving life had turned. The room spun as I pushed myself up, my palms stinging from the fall, the grit of the floor embedding into my skin like tiny accusations. But no one reached out a hand, no outstretched arm from the sea of familiar faces, no murmur of concern. My son Nathan just stared at his shoes, as if the floor could swallow his shame, his broad shoulders hunched in that tuxedo I'd helped pay for without him knowing. His silence was a deeper cut than the push, a hesitation that spoke volumes about how far he'd drifted from the boy I'd raised. "You're not part of this family anymore," Vanessa continued, adjusting her veil with a smug flick, her manicured nails glinting under the lights. "Nathan and I deserve that cabin for our honeymoon and beyond. It's prime lakefront, and we're building a life." Her words dripped with entitlement, echoing the months of snide remarks about my faded dresses, my reliable old SUV, my quiet existence. But this was unforgivable. I felt a wave of nausea rise, my stomach churning with a mix of humiliation and fury, and for a split second, I wondered if I could just stay down there on the floor, invisible, like the overlooked elder I was becoming in their eyes. But no, something stirred inside me, a quiet resolve flickering to life amid the pain, whispering that this was the moment everything changed. If my story resonates with you, if you've ever felt pushed aside by those you love most, subscribe to the channel and stay with me for the next one. We're in this together. My name is Beatrice Caldwell. I'm 69 years old, a part-time librarian at the local community center, driving a 12-year-old Honda Civic, shopping sales at thrift stores. The library smells of aged paper and lemon polish, a comforting haven where I shelve books 3 afternoons a week, finding solace in the quiet rustle of pages and the grateful smiles of patrons who see me as more than just old. My Civic hums reliably down familiar streets, its faded blue paint a testament to decades of careful maintenance, and my wardrobe, soft cottons and sensible flats, reflects a life of intentional simplicity. To Vanessa and even Nathan lately, I'm just a relic clinging to the past, a burden with outdated habits and no real value. But I've built a life of careful choices, secrets tucked away, like the dusty books on my shelves, hidden compartments in my world that no one bothered to explore. My late husband, Robert, and I had voted long ago to live modestly, to shield our successes from prying eyes, a decision born from watching friends lose everything to envy or greed. As I gathered myself that night, the string quartet's music fading into awkward silence, the violinist's bow hovering mid-air, the notes dying like my trust. The memories crashed over me in waves, pulling me under with their vivid clarity. The ballroom's golden lights blurred through unshed tears, and I could feel the cool draft from the vents brushing my heated cheeks, a small mercy amid the suffocating stares. It started 3 years ago when Nathan brought Vanessa to my modest ranch-style home on Elm Street. The screen door creaked as they entered, carrying the faint scent of her floral perfume that clashed with the warm aroma of the apple pie I'd baked from scratch. Her nose wrinkled at the worn hardwood floors, scuffed from years of family footsteps, the family photos in simple frames gathering a light dust that I always meant to wipe away, but never quite got to. This is where Nathan grew up. She'd asked him, loud enough for me to hear from the kitchen, her voice laced with disbelief as she trailed a finger along the countertop, as if checking for flaws. I paused mid-stir, the wooden spoon heavy in my hand, feeling a prick of unease in my chest, like the first tiny crack in a dam. From then on, every visit chipped away at me, each one a subtle erosion of my confidence, leaving me questioning if I was indeed too set in my ways, too alone in this big old house that held so many echoes of Robert, Beatrice. "You should downsize," Vanessa had said 6 months back during Sunday dinner, her fork poking at my homemade lasagna like it offended her. The cheese bubbling golden, but apparently not up to her standards. The dining room smelled of garlic and basil, the table set with my good china that I rarely used anymore, and the afternoon sun filtered through lace curtains, casting soft patterns on the walls. Her smile was plastic, fooling only Nathan, who nodded along like he'd forgotten how to think for himself, his eyes lighting up at her words as if they were gospel. I remember the way my fork hovered over my plate, a moment of hesitation where I swallowed the urge to defend my life. My home, the place where Nathan had taken his first steps, where Robert and I had danced in the kitchen to old records. Instead, I forced a smile, but inside a quiet fear bloomed. Was she right? Was I holding on too tightly to the past, burdening them with my presence? The jabs escalated. My clothes were outdated, said with a pitying glance at my floral blouse during a family barbecue, the smoke from the grill mingling with her judgmental sigh. My car a hazard, as she eyed my Civic in the driveway, its tires worn but safe, while hers gleamed with least perfection. "My job pointless for someone your age," whispered over coffee one morning, the steam rising between us like a barrier. Each one landed like a paper cut, small, but they added up, bleeding my self-esteem drop by drop, until I found myself second-guessing every choice, every outfit, every quiet evening alone with a book. Nathan's growing agreement was the deepest wound. He'd squeeze my hand afterward, murmuring, "She's just looking out for you, Mom." But his eyes avoided mine, a micro-conflict that twisted like a knife, his loyalty fracturing right before me. I limped toward the exit, the cool evening air hitting my face as I stepped into the parking lot, carrying the faint brine of nearby Lake Meridian on the breeze, a reminder of the cabin they coveted so desperately. My knees throbbed with each step, the scrapes burning under my stockings, and I paused for a reflective beat at the door, hand on the handle, feeling the weight of 140 pairs of eyes boring into my back like invisible pins. Whispers followed me. "Poor Beatrice, so fragile," from Nathan's aunt. "The bride's right, she can't manage alone," from a cousin, each one a subtle poison, amplifying my isolation. My hands shook, dialing a number I hadn't touched in 2 years, the phone's screen glowing coldly in the dim light, my worn purse slung over my shoulder like an old friend. "Marcus, it's Beatrice. Meet me at the Grand Pavilion right now. Bring the portfolio." My voice cracked, but resolve hardened it, a firmness rising from somewhere deep, born of years of quiet strength. Marcus, my late husband's trusted attorney, paused on the line, his voice steady but laced with concern, the background hum of his office a distant comfort. "Are you certain, Mrs. Caldwell? This reveals everything. No going back." I glanced back at the glowing windows. Vanessa probably toasting her victory with champagne flutes clinking, Nathan at her side, and a surge of clarity washed over me. This wasn't just about the cabin. It was about my worst. Positive. 1 hour. The night air cooled my flushed skin, but inside, a storm raged. Fear of losing Nathan forever warring with the self-awareness that I'd enabled this by staying silent too long. Sitting in my Civic under the sodium lights, the orange glow casting long shadows across the dashboard, cluttered with library receipts and a faded photo of Robert, I waited. 30 minutes to upend their world. 30 minutes to show them the cost of underestimating me, the woman they dismissed as frail and forgettable. The engine ticked as it cooled, a rhythmic sound mirroring my pounding heart, and flashbacks hit hard, pulling me back like tides to the shore. Nathan introducing Vanessa, her designer handbag clashing with my quilted throw pillows on the living room couch, the fabric soft from years of use. "How quaint," she'd said, eyeing the cabin keys on my hook by the door, her fingers lingering just a second too long, a subtle gesture that planted the first seed of suspicion. That first dinner, the clink of forks on plates, she grilled me on finances over roast chicken that I'd seasoned with herbs from my windowsill garden. "Widow's pension must be tight, Beatrice. Ever thought of selling assets?" I'd brushed it off with a laugh, but alarm bells rang faintly in my mind. An inner reflection on how Robert and I had chosen this life to avoid exactly such scrutiny. His business acumen building quietly while we lived simply, protecting our peace. Patterns emerged over coffees and holidays, each visit a layer added to the tension. Vanessa lingering on the cabin's value, its 2.5 acres on Lake Meridian, bought in 1985 for $85,000. Now worth over $750,000 per recent appraisals I'd secretly requested. The scent of pine from memory filled my thoughts. The cabin's wooden deck where Robert and I had watched sunsets, now a prize in her eyes. Overheard phone call one afternoon while they thought I was napping. I crept to the kitchen doorway, heart pounding, hearing her whisper into her phone. "Yes, the cabin's in a premium spot. If we convince her it's too much, we can claim it for her safety." Her voice was conspiratorial, the words slicing through me, but I played dumb, returning to my chair with a feigned yawn, inside seething with a vulnerability I hid behind polite smiles, fearing confrontation would push Nathan further away. Escalation came post-engagement, the air sick with wedding plans and underlying pressure. Brochures for assisted living shoved across my table during a tense tea. The pages glossy with images of smiling seniors that felt mocking. "Beatrice, isolation's risky at your stage," she'd say, her tone dripping false concern, while Nathan echoed, "Mom, Vanessa's concerned. The cabin's upkeep," his voice trailed off, a hesitant pause where he fiddled with his coffee mug, avoiding my gaze, a micro-conflict that broke my heart. Watching my boy, once so protective, parrot her like a script he'd memorized. The heartbreak was visceral, a lump in my throat as I nodded along, inner thoughts racing. How had love blinded him so completely? Was I losing him to save my own secrets? I investigated quietly. The phone call to realtor friend Paula, a small act of defiance. From my sunlit kitchen, the receiver warm in my hand. "Paula, dig into their finances, discreetly." What she uncovered chilled me. Wedding at $65,000 on credit. The venue's grandeur a facade. Rental 20 month overdue. Eviction notices looming. Cars leased beyond means, payments eating their income. The cabin was their bailout, a desperate grasp at stability built on my hidden foundation. The revelation sat heavy, a reflective pause where I stared at the cabin photo on my fridge, fingers tracing the frame, realizing my silence had fed their greed. 3 days pre-wedding, Vanessa cornered me in my living room, the afternoon light slanting through blinds, dust motes dancing like unspoken truce. Beatrice, stop being selfish. We've invested in this marriage. You owe us the cabin. Demand, not request. Her eyes hard as she leaned in, the scent of her lotion cloying. I stood firm, but inside, fear flickered. What if Nathan chose her over me forever? That night, alone with the hum of the refrigerator, I phoned Marcus. Prepare disclosures. Might need to show my hand. He warned of fallout, his voice grave over the line. Family ties could snap, Beatrice. But betrayal sealed it, a self-awareness blooming. I'd protected them too long at the cost of my own voice. Now, in the lot, 20th. Minutes left. Breeze, off the lake nearby, whispered change, rustling leaves in the adjacent trees, a sensory reminder of the cabin's peace they sought to steal. Inside, laughter mocked me through the walls, faint music seeping out, twisting the knife of exclusion. Marcus arrived, briefcase in hand, his sedan pulling up with a crunch of gravel. Mrs. Caldwell, the portfolio is ready. The leather scent of his case mixed with night air as we entered. My limp more pronounced, each step a cinematic transition from shadows to light. Music halted abruptly, the quartet's final note hanging unresolved. Eyes on us, a collective intake breath. Vanessa, what now, Beatrice? Crawl back for more humiliation, her voice sharp, but a flicker of unease in her eyes. A subtle fear she masked with bravado. Ladies and gentlemen, Marcus announced, his tone professional, echoing slightly in the vast space. Urgent matters for Nathan and Vanessa Caldwell. The chandelier's light reflected off his glasses, adding gravity. Nathan approached, ashen, his tie askew from nervous tugging. Mom, his voice cracked. A micro-conflict in his pleading eyes. Loyalty to her warring with buried love for me. Marcus. Financial supports revoked. He opened the portfolio with a crisp snap. Gasps rippled like waves. I'd secretly covered their rent $84,000 over 30 months, monthly transfers from my account, disguised as bonuses. Debts $52,000 cleared quietly. Wedding deposit $12,000 guaranteed. Proof, bank statement from October 18th, 2023. Transfer $2,800 to landlord. The ink still sharp in my memory. Vanessa. Lies. She's broke. Look at her life. Her hands clenched at her sides, veil trembling. A reflective pause where she glanced at guests for support, finding only curiosity. Appearances deceive, I said, my voice steady now, rising from the vulnerability I'd buried, despite the throbbing in my knees as I stood tall. My husband built wealth quietly. Cabin? One asset. The words felt liberating, a growth moment where I claimed my truce. Climax built, tension thick as the ballroom's velvet drapes. Full reveal. Portfolio $6.2 million investments. Commercial strip mall renting. 62,000 taos month. The hum of its tenants, a distant empire. Stocks, bonds diversified wisely. Will redirected to elder abuse charities, a decision born from pain, but empowering. Vanessa lunged forward in desperation, her heels clicking sharply, but Nathan held her back, his grip firm, yet trembling. Mom, please. His voice broke, eyes welling with belated regret, an inner reflection visible in his furrowed brow, realizing the boy he'd been was slipping away. Consequences, I said, meeting his gaze, feeling a pang of maternal sorrow but standing tall. The push, the demands, the erosion, it all led here to justice. Marcus escorted me out as the room erupted in whispers, the weight of revelations settling like dust. I didn't look back. Epilogue. 2 years later, my foundation thrives, a bustling office scented with coffee and hope, helping hundreds reclaim dignity. Nathan divorced Vanessa amid the fallout, His calls apologetic but distant, a hesitant bridge we're slowly mending through honest talks. I mentor women like me, empowered in my thrift store finery, the cabin's still mine, a sanctuary of sunsets and solitude. Dignity reclaimed, not through wealth's flash, but through the quiet strength of boundaries set and lessons learned. If this moved you, comment your story below. Subscribe. We're not alone.